Hey everyone, this is a guide that I've been promising to deliver for quite some time now, and I apologize it's taken so long. Um, but this is essentially just a complete 3D character guide with all the video footage attached together and with very little editing. The goal of this is really just to provide you with an additional resource. It's a bit slower in case there were any parts that you were missing while going through the complete guide or any of the other resources I provided. So this way you can just kind of use this as a reference if there are any particular sections that you were having trouble with. You can just kind of follow the movements I have on the screen. Um, I'm not going to talk very much, and I'm also not going to put too much. I'm not going to put music or anything in the background just because this video is extremely long. Um, and that way you can also just like put your own background music or anything like that. So you can just run this kind of and use this just however you would like. The video right now is sped up to 2x, just to really cut the video time in half, just so wouldn't have to upload a 7-hour video. But if you do need to slow down the footage at all, you can use YouTube's video footage speed options and just set to 0.5 or anything like that. Hopefully that will still be good. So anyway, what I'll do as well, and as part of this guide, is I'll basically chime in for each new section and just basically talk about what I'm doing, and we can just go from there. And maybe I'll just highlight a little bit of things about some of the design choices and all that stuff too. We can just kind of talk through it, but I won't be talking through the entire guide. I will just chime in, like I said before, just chime in for each individual section, explain briefly what I'm doing, and then we can just and then I'll just let the footage roll. So feel free to use this as you see fit. And as always, I appreciate you viewing all the content, and I hope it's helpful to you. So as you can see now, we've started, and we've just gotten past the part where we imported the reference into the reference images. So we did a front and a side view. I didn't actually include a footage of drawing the reference image because I didn't actually capture the entire process. Um, so that part I'll leave out for the sake of this video. There's a point where I might talk about concept art and drawing in some point on my channel. I'm not an expert at it, but I don't mind talking about what I do know about this topic. But that's a little bit off topic for it now. It's a fairly straightforward process, so I won't go into it too much. Anyway, let's talk about what's happening now. So we are constructing the face mask. There's a million ways you can uh, go about making a head on a character, but I think it's a good idea to make the head first. Um, and the reason for that is because trying to make the head after other parts of the body are created just makes it a lot more difficult to attach parts together. Because what you'll find is that the loops on the character's like other parts might not have the same number of vertices to connect them with easily. So if you use a tool like Bridge Edge Loop, or you can even just manually merge vertices together, you'll have uneven vertices, and it'll just make it really difficult. So doing the head first and constructing the rest of the model from there is also just very helpful. And then making when I was actually putting together this complete guide, I did a little experimentation as to like how to make the head a bit more efficiently. And I don't know if this is like the most optimal way. I know professional 3D modelers could correct me. Um, but what I found was making a face mask like this on a completely flat plane was a very helpful way to start because then you can have control over the important face loops. You want to have these face loops constructed a certain way. I mean, for the most part, because when you animate the character's face, it just makes it so much easier later on. If you have the topology done um, not with the loops in mind, it's just going to not deform very well. So as you can see here, we're also just navigating around the model itself, and we're just trying to move it into the third dimension now. So once we've made the core loops, i.e. the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, we then want to move these vertices so that it matches the shape of the face. That's really what we're just doing here. Unfortunately, modeling is as much an art as it is a science, so trying to make things exact is not really the goal here. Just do the best you can, and ultimately what you can do is you can adjust the model so that the model itself looks the way you like, even if it doesn't necessarily match your reference image 100%. Because you'll drive yourself nuts if you try to match it 100% to your reference. But it's good for initial construction, as you can see here. So yeah, just continue the process of moving around vertices, and as you can see here, that's basically what we're just going to do. We'll repeat this here and try to line it up on the side view, and eventually you'll fill in the rest of the vertices on the face. Okay, so now that we've generally shaped the 3 portion of the face mask, we're going to fill in the rest of the vertices that make the cheek part and the jaws and the jawline. So basically what you can do is just take your existing geometry and extrude out and just kind of piecemeal it together until you get essentially what, a complete mask. Um, Typically the way I do this, as you could see, is I will extrude like some of the middle faces out, and then I will connect them using the F shortcut key later. You can do this a number of ways. This is the way that I felt was most intuitive, but as long as you basically just fill in these faces, that's really all you need to do. You'll have to shape them out a little bit afterwards to kind of match the contours here. So what I'm doing here in this particular case, I'm making a small curvature for the cheek area. And then once we extrude out again, we can flatten out that side. So I think another important thing you're going to see here is that I'm also going to go into front view, and I'm going to try to take some of the loops that we've just constructed and move them much closer to the head itself. And the reason for this is because the sides of the head are actually relatively flat. If you were looking from it like from the front itself, and you don't want to have kind of this very Um, I'm not exactly sure what the words for, but you want the face to look a bit fuller this way. If you were to move the vertices a bit too close in, you would find that the head's going to kind of have an arrow shape, and it's not going to look quite as good. So keep them as like these two edges basically as close together as possible while you're doing this part, and you can kind of keep it at that same level while you construct the rest of the head going back the side. Now for the neck in the back of the head, it's going to be a lot more of the same, where we're basically just extruding and moving vertices until it matches the reference as good as you possibly can. This first part here is we're basically just leveling out the um, the back loop of the head to keep it in line with where the neck starts, and that's just kind of helpful to have as a baseline. So I'm adjusting it, curving it a little bit, but something like this is good enough. Um, and then what we do is we just basically extrude back and we fill in the faces on the back side to create the back of the head. And then we can extrude from a few vertices underneath the back of the head that we just created to create the neck. Now, keep in mind here that you don't actually have to get that fancy with the back of the head. This would be mostly applicable for characters with hair. If your character is balder, you might want to use a little bit more detail just in that particular case. But because if your character has hair, you really just can kind of wing the back of the head part. As you'll notice as well, I haven't constructed the top of the head very much either. So you can basically use your best discretion here. In this case, it just saves a little bit of geometry in the end if you don't really need it and it's never going to be visible. Yeah, so the back of the head, kind of do a similar thing where I just select vertices, extrude them out, and kind of create this shape. And then we go ahead and we just, as you notice, I made a little bit of an error there. And then we just kind of connect it from the bottom. But I'm going to make a couple of loops just so that the number of loops on that top extrusion there match the neck there. And I actually clean up one of them on the back of the neck. And then after all this is done, you can just move smooth vertices around, adjust them, and just round it out a bit. You'll want to also delete the bottom vertices on the neck so that when you extrude later to make the torso, it's a bit nicer. But I believe I do that when we make the torso. I don't do it at this part. So we'll worry about that later. So now here we're going to make the inside of the eyes and the inside of the mouth. We're not going to actually do the eyes and the mouth really pieces themselves here, but this inside mouth and eye loops, the eye sockets, I guess you can call them, help to create a little bit of the depth there. Plus, with like stylized, like slash anime style characters, you don't actually use a sphere for the eyeballs. So rather, this just creates a backdrop for the eyes and the mouth. And you can texture these basically white for the eyes and black for the mouth, and it just creates that background. That way, it's not like your character's opening their eyes or their mouth, and there's just nothing there. So it's helpful to have this here. And it's fairly straightforward. You just extrude from the existing points and don't overthink it too much. You want to create a little bit of geometry and an extra loop just to kind of preserve the shape of the mouth and the eyes. You'll see that there's one loop that's close there. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Now, this is the part where we do the ears. I tend to have ears done as an afterthought in my characters, and it's something I probably should think about more. But basically, as long as you have the head, it's not too terribly difficult to construct the ear. Essentially, what you're going to do is just find where the ear is on your reference, and you're going to make a hole right there, and then just kind of extrude and scale in, so that you have this extra edge loop you can work with. So basically, I just made this hole where the ear would be, and then you can extrude out a couple of times to make the ear shape. Um, Depends on how much detail you want on the ear. You could also get away with just like texture drawing detail on the ear. It really just depends on your art style. But this is really just the basics of getting an ear done. And I'm also just going to connect the loops here this way, just so that I still essentially preserve the quads. Um, this is also a part you don't really need to overthink that much. It really This matters much more depending on the art style you're going for. Um, Here, I'm also just making the crease, so you can do that as well, just to kind of preserve the shape of the ear. And then you can just kind of move things around. If you want to add more detail to your ear, just select the center piece. Select the faces kind of in the center of the ear, and you can extrude those in. And then you can use the knife tool to construct a bit more detail if you really wanted to. For efficiency's sake, I wouldn't bother with that personally, and maybe you could just draw it on with your texture, but that's really up to you. This is just the basic shape of the ear. As mentioned earlier, for the eyes, I actually don't use a sphere to make the eyeball. That's because in Toon shaded models, that depth doesn't really make a difference. So rather than using the extra geometry to make like a complete sphere, you can just go ahead and make a disc that represents the eye itself, and it's just a little bit easier. Also forgot to mention too that this section also does the eyebrows, and you essentially can do the eyebrows just by extruding from the tip of the eye socket, and then you can just follow your reference from that extrusion. It's a little bit tricky to work with here, but just do the best you can to clean it up a little bit. One thing I found that's not super efficient, or I haven't figured out a really efficient way to do it, is like if you need to add more geometry to the eyebrows, you can use the knife tool to make some cuts. But what I would do is I would actually make cut to like add more geometry. You would add it kind of to the tip of the eyebrow loops, so the outer out loop. And to do that, you would start with one loop in, select a vertex, draw the knife to cut the top loop in half, and then connect to the adjacent vertex on the loop right below it. It's a little bit hard to say in words, but that's a way to do it. And also, I did here, depending on your character's eyelash style, I just deleted that one portion of the eyelash to make a gap. Eyebrows are very similar to making the eyelash. Um, but instead, rather than trying to extrude directly from a piece of the head, you could just take basically a plane, which is what I did here. But I just like, I duplicated vertex and extruded to make essentially a plane. And then you just shape the plane to the eyebrow. Make sure you also turn on snapping while you initially do the work on the eyebrow, just to make things a little bit easier to work with. And then you just kind of follow the contours and adjust it. At the very end of making the eyebrow here, I just move it very, very slightly outside the head just so there's nothing clipping in it. A small gap shouldn't be a big deal. And if you need to, you can add a little bit more geometry to match the contour of your head a little bit better. Um, so a bit of a mistake. I thought we were making the eyes a little bit earlier while I was recording this in real time. But we're doing it now. But basically, very similar things that I said earlier. But we'll start with a circle mesh. And then what we can do is we can kind of construct the iris and stuff like that through it. I do it this way because the way I texture the model later on is a much more simplistic way. But kind of a trade off of this is that I had to model some of the details of the eye through the geometry. If you were to texture more traditionally, you could just draw the details on the circle and you could just fill it in to create basically a circle mesh. But here I just basically extrude in and kind of match the contour of the eye to make some of the details. Don't worry too much about like how much vertices you're going to use here. It's really not that much in the grand scheme of things. So you don't have to be too careful here. And then remember just at the very end to give the eyes a little bit of rotation just so they appear a bit better in the side view. And you can also use the proportional editing tool just to move the the pupil out a little bit to give the eye socket or the eye disc a little bit of roundness. The eye shines is depends on your character as well, but I'll explain briefly how I accomplished it. I found a really good tutorial on this. I should have links in my complete guide, probably on the website, if not in the video itself. I don't quite remember. But basically, you have to kind of reset the eye's position, so rotate it back to flat, and then rotate it in object mode. You need to do this in object mode because it works in a weird way with the modifiers. So then what you do is you basically just create another circle mesh for your eye shine, and you do basically all this transformation in object mode, except you can scale the disk in edit mode. Just make sure you're translating, moving it in object mode. Same with the eyes. And then you're just going to, and then what's important here is when you add these modifiers, is that you make sure that you select the right mirror targets. So I believe one of them is going to mirror the head and one of them is going to mirror the eye. We'll see in a second here. So the first mirror modifier actually mirrors the eye itself. The second one mirrors the head. And then after that, you can then use those eyeshine.l and eyeshine.r vertex groups to effectively use a mask modifier to put them in the right spot. So especially in like anime style characters, the eye shines are not mirrored. Rather, they appear on the same side relative to the viewer. At this point, all the major facial features are complete. So we'll start constructing the body, and to do that, we'll start with the torso first. The way I like to do this, as mentioned a bit earlier, is that you can simply just extrude from the neck down and then create kind of this cylinder type shape, and then you can just conform it to the character's shape, body shape. So you can go ahead. Yeah. What I also did here is I did a small amount of cleanup, removing some unneeded geometry. Also just to make it a bit more even on both sides of the neck. So like you can see that there's an even number of faces now. I did create a triangle there just to cut off the part of the head before the neck. I don't think it's much of a problem because at this point you don't need to worry too much about adding more geometry. And you don't really want to add too much more geometry to the head anyway, because then it will easily get dense. So basically, just to complete the torso, you're just going to extrude the first one out from the neck and just scale it out a little bit. And don't focus too much on getting the shape exact right now. You're just going to make a couple extrusions, key extrusions. So one here basically for the chest area, and then a couple down to the to basically a crotch. But from the chest area here, I make another extrusion out just to kind of get kind of where the shoulders would start. And then it did make a little, and then cut that in half as well so that you can use that to extrude the shoulders later, the arms, I mean. And then from here, there's, yeah, just kill that one vertex and make it completely flat at the bottom. And then you could just extrude down like normal. You don't have to completely follow the number of times I make extrusions here, but it can be helpful to start with how many I do here, just so you have a little bit more consistency. And once you get a bit better at the modeling process, you can just then get a bit more comfortable about where you want to put things, how many extrusions you want to do. And then you get a little bit better with the tools in Blender. You'll also know how to make corrections if you need to. And then all I'll really do at this part is I eventually turn on the X-ray mode. I flatten out the bottom, and I just shape it around the side view a bit. Just around the chest area, Don't try to shape too much around the breasts because we'll do that separately, assuming your character has them. Um, yeah, and really just what you do here. One thing I would like to also mention here is it does help, and I did this just a little bit prior to this, is to round out the torso prior to doing this portion of the edit. Because what happens is if you don't round it out on the sides, you'll basically have a very blocky looking torso. Um, so it does help to just kind of clean it up a little bit. I use the smooth vertices tool quite a bit. I map it to my D key, and it helps just kind of round out a little bit more. See, like I think I pull this out a little bit. Yeah, there you go. That way it has a bit more of a round shape and it looks a bit more organic. And then more or less just make adjustments until you're happy with the shape. Um, just like anything in 3D modeling, you can always go back and make corrections later. So don't worry too much if you don't get it quite right. Um, and really all there is to it. I'm making a bit of adjustments to the vertices around the crotch area, but we'll be talking about the crotch area a bit afterwards. So this is kind of more OCD, but it does help in the initial construction. So the crotch part can actually be very complicated. However, because we were basically building from the head down, it makes things a bit easier than trying to just build like a crotch from from legs or anything like that. Because what you can do is then you can just connect the main portion of the crotch like so. And then you can just make a circular shape where the legs get extruded out. And you just have a bit more control over it. Do note as well that there is a curvature from the basically the stomach area down to the crotch. Just helps to make your mesh a little bit more organically shaped. And don't forget as well to move the crotch down a bit like that. You're effectively just creating underwear. Um, and then from there, you can be OCD about it and round out the legs as much as you want. Um, but for the most part, as long as it's somewhat circular, you should be fine. Next, you're just going to extrude the legs out a little bit just to make a basically a flat area. Just around from basically to connect the crotch area to where the legs begin. And then what I'd like to do here is I also just like to even out the vertices on both sides. The reason why this is important is because if you do construct your legs at some point, you might find that they're unevenly shaped after a certain point, and it just makes it more difficult to fix later on. It's not the end of the world if you don't do this, but it's something that over time I've just found to be a bit of an optimization. Just so I don't have legs that are like weirdly shaped or thighs that are weirdly shaped, like a bit narrower on the inside than the outside, or vice versa. This just to kind of keep the shape a bit more consistent. Um, and then once you make this fix here, you can just simply extrude the rest of the legs down. I am going to chime in here around the knees because this is a fairly complex part of it. But it's actually not too complex if you break it down. So essentially, what you want to do is you want to have a graceful bend of the knees. So one way to do that is you can add additional geometry basically by making an inset kind of where the front of the knee is, just so that you also have that rounded shape. Um, and then you can actually take advantage of using triangles to um, make cuts to kind of reduce, the geometry in the back. Now, this is based on some diagrams I found online, but I did find that in practice, when you remove that middle edge loop that we just did, it actually bends a bit nicer because it collapses on itself rather than having a weird. It's hard to explain, but I found that it's a little bit nicer there. So we are moving on to the feet, but just to finish up on the topic where we were on with the knee, is that I've gotten questions as well as how to do it without making triangles. The cop out answer is that I wouldn't worry about it, but the more specifically, what you can do is instead of making the triangles like did there, you could potentially make a instead of making a single cut from the one vertex to the other, like to make the first triangle, let's say, you can make a knife cut where you kind of cut in the middle of that one quad and then connect it down. It's hard to really explain without an infographic. Um, and then you can use additional geometry for the back. I just don't think it's necessarily worth it. I think it's just fine to leave a triangle there. If you do find that if you're making like loop cuts later on and the triangles get in the way, then maybe it's something that you can look into a bit more as needed. Also, just let me know in the comments if it's something you want me to clarify a bit further here. That's not a problem as well. Anyway, as about the feet, I didn't really put a whole lot of effort into this. But basically just extruding from the foot down. Made sure there was a couple of loops that I can work with, and then I just extruded out the basically a piece from the front of the leg and kind of worked my way around. I think the important part about making the feet here is that you at least can connect the bottom properly, and then you can also still just have some semblance of like the shape around the top. So the part where like the top of the foot kind of meets with the shin and the leg, that geometry is a bit more complicated, but it just kind of happens to work itself out if you extrude it the way I did here. And then the rest of it is just more or less just shaping it to actually make it look like a foot. I didn't do toes or anything here, but when we talk about the hands, that you can use a very similar strategy to make toes that way. Um, what you would need here basically is you would need to make some knife cuts on the basically the tip of the foot to give yourself enough room for the number of toes you want to extrude out. And since the model is subdivided, it will round out the toes as well. Okay, as for the arms, we're just going to use that socket that we made a bit earlier when we were constructing the torso. Just select basically the two faces right there. I'm also just giving myself room here to extrude that. And I've also rounded it out, made it fairly even as well as I could. Um, yeah, and then you can just delete the edge, and then you just basically make a circle. And then from that circle, I also was very OCD about this, and I just kind of made the circle a bit more spherical before I started the arm extrusion. And then once you have that, you can move that circle out a little bit more to match up with where the shoulders start. And then you should be able to extrude. Okay, I think I flattened it first. That side. Yeah, and then you can make extrusions. This is a bit easier to do when your character's in a T pose. But it is doable with an A pose. You just kind of have to go back and make the shoulder part a bit later. And it might make your deformations a little bit weirder when you're actually rigging the character. But you can actually model the character in the A pose, and you can change it to a T pose later if you want to rig it um, afterwards. So that's like an option for you. So I actually do the same thing I did with the knee here on the shoulder, just to give it a little bit more roundness when it bends, to preserve the shape of it better, and give it the same type of cut here. It works fairly well. We'll do the same thing for the elbow as well once we get to that point. And then basically you just extrude down, and like I said, do the same thing with the elbow. That's pretty much it for making the arm. So the hands are a bit more complex, but if you have a solid reference, you can work your way through it. So what I did is I just found a random image on the internet and used that as a reference here. Honestly, any flat reference image for the hand works just fine. And basically, what we're going to do here is we're going to, yeah, just shrink it down to make it a little bit easier. I kind of lined it up with the arm actually, but it's not completely necessary. You could even construct the hand in a separate Blender file or on the side, um, and then just scale it down later when you're ready to connect it back to the character. But the one thing I think is very helpful is to preserve the basically the edge loop that you have on the arm. It just makes it easier than trying to like. So it's like, for example, if that edge loop right there that we just duplicated and removed from the arm has a total of 6 vertices on it, it's easier to start kind of with that as a base than to just kind of construct the hand and then try to fit it later and find out that you don't actually have 6 on your loop on your end loop. So that's why I like to start with that loop from the arm. So anyway, basically to construct a hand, I just made an initial tweak to the loop to kind of get that shape where like the palm shape a little bit. And then yeah, extrude out a little bit and then just do it twice. Um I think in this case, like you could follow mine closely just to make it a little bit easier to follow, but you don't have to do exactly the same thing I do. But then basically what I do is I use the knife tool again to just basically make some cuts so I can extrude the fingers later. Make sure you repeat it on the bottom as well. If you enable X-ray, it actually just make it easier to follow your existing cuts. Um, so now you can extrude the fingers, which is what I believe I do now. Yep, let's extrude the fingers. So I think one thing we could think about as well, and I didn't necessarily do it on this character model, but you can also do a similar strategy like I've done with the knee or the shoulders for each part that bends on the finger. But I didn't bother here because I just felt like that would add a little bit too much extra geometry and I didn't think it was necessary, but you could do that. And if you really want to get more accuracy with the rig, then it's not a bad idea. Um yeah, basically with the extrusion part, just extrude them out and kind of match them up the best you can. Cut them around the middle, but you want to essentially um 3 main cuts on each finger because that's how a finger bends in real life. There's 3 main sections of it. So try to preserve that. Plus there's an extra loop kind of near the edge of or near the base of the fingers just to kind of preserve that shape as well. Um yeah, I think what I do here is I actually kind of yeah, do it like this. I think I also inset them. Sorry. I think I also inset them at some point. And then basically just from here, you just do a little bit of shaping. It's a bit tedious on the hand, but you just kind of cycle through your orthographic and perspective views and just shape the hand to the best of your ability. Okay, making the thumb is a little awkward, and I'm not sure if I've done this the best to be honest, but you best just basically take the side of the hand that you had constructed there and just make extrusion out and just do the best you can to make a few extrusions to line up with the thumb on the reference. You'll have to estimate the positioning of the thumb in the 3D space after you construct it from the top view. But you can use your own hand as a reference. The thumb basically will just kind of hover below your fingers, and also a little bit open as well. Just do the best you can here. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then, like the fingers, you still want to make sure you have similar number of edge loops for where each bend of the thumb is. And then it's more or less just how you make the thumb. Once you're done with the hand, you can actually do. We'll connect it to the character here, but I also don't think it's a terrible idea to actually just save your hand to a separate blend file so you can import it every time you make a character. It just saves a lot of time. So I like to make reusable components like the hands for this very reason. Now, anyway, to attach it to the character, you first select the hand and then the model, and then you just do Control J in object mode. It'll join together. And then you just have to align the hand up in edit mode. And I actually just manually connect the faces by selecting the edges and just pressing F to fill them. Um, they should line up, but I did notice that even though I started with 6 loops, it wasn't a perfect match, and that was because I added the extra hand geometry on the side. So I just I was able to kind of fill it out based on like I filled the fronts and the backs first and then the sides, and it still ended up lining up pretty well. And then after that, you could just clean up the shape of the arm with a hand on it. If you need to change the side of the hand or anything like that, that's also fine. I actually chose not to curl the fingers here. I don't think it's necessary. Leave them stiff like that. It also makes it a little bit easier, I believe, with the rigging process. No need to over engineer it. And after that, you can just make any adjustments you want to make. If you don't like the shape of the hand as much, you can just mess around with that. So now this is the part where we do the breasts. So yeah, this will feel a little bit awkward talking about this, but it really also just depends on your character as well. As you see here, my character is a female, obviously. Now you may still need to do a little bit of this for a certain male character, especially if you have male characters that are toned or just straight up ripped. They won't have really like large protruding breasts, but they you can use a similar geometry kind of closer to the chest to represent that as well. So it's not a bad thing to talk about here. Um, in this case, my character's breasts are quite large, so that was just a design choice that I've made for various reasons. But as in a way, it's kind of nice here because it does help with visualizing how it's done in the 3D character creation process. So I guess you could say that. Anyway, all you really do is you just create a hole on the chest area, the torso, and then you round it out and you extrude it out. It's going to look really awkward like at this point here, but you can then just kind of fix it. One thing I do find though, yeah, just make sure to shape it to the front reference here at this point. One thing I do find though is that once you're done with that, um, you will want to use your perspective view a lot here when shaping the breast, especially for characters that are bustier, because you might find that the breasts will look a lot larger in the 3D space, even if you followed your reference pretty closely. So don't so you could be a bit more liberal with the actual like results on the in the on the 3D model. So don't feel like you have to follow a reference exactly here. You don't need to really do that at all anyway. But especially in this context, it will definitely be a bit jarring. So really, just kind of as long as you get the feel of what you're going for. Other than that, it's really just kind of adjust the shape best you can and basically close the circles together. One thing you want to do as well is typically, without sounding a bit weird, but like the nipple area is actually a bit lower than you would probably expect. So yeah, so you'd want to move them down a little bit. But then again, you could just shape it kind of how you feel. And then once you make one last extrusion, and then you can just merge the vertices at the center to create the closing part. You can do this without creating the triangles here, but I find it actually kind of works a bit better with the triangle shape um, in practice. But you can, depending on the actual number of vertices you have on the circles, you can sometimes get away without doing that. I also like to like at the very end, add a crease, just to kind of. I was gonna say I add a crease to kind of accentuate the bottom part to make it a bit more like creased. Um, I know it's not very well explained, but also kind of helps with connecting it to the basically the underneath the armpit. But you can do that at the end. It doesn't matter all that much if your character is wearing looser clothing. And really, all you do at this point is just make sure you connect the inside piece. Okay, so I add a crease here, and then smooth that a little bit, and then just connect the inside piece. If it broke off, you can use the clipping from the mirror modifier. Another thing to note while we're doing this is giving the breast some space while you model it is a good thing. Because you try to model them a bit too close together, you are going to run into issues with the clipping. So even the shape kind of requires them to be closer together. It's good to kind of model them a little bit further apart at first. And I think I've talked about this enough. So let's move on to the next part once this is done. So similar to the breasts, making it a butt is you just need that circular shape. Now I won't say I'm a butt expert by any means here, but you don't have to create a hole like you do with the breast. Just kind of select the the faces that kind of make up that area, and then you can make an inset. And after that, you can just kind of circle it out a little bit. If you need to add more geometry, you can make a secondary inset. And after that, you just kind of make some shapes. You can use the crease tool as well to make the crack area more pronounced. Also, really depends on your character. If they're wearing skin tight clothing, obviously you'll need to add more detail to the butt. But sorry. But some but sometimes you can work more efficiently if you know your character is basically never going to wear that type of clothing. So just a basic thing like this is fine a lot of the times. And here I just make the butt part overlap the thigh a little bit in the back, and also just kind of round it out a bit more to and adjust the shape until I feel comfortable with it. Really not much else to this. All right, so the next portion here is the hair. So we're going to start making the hair, and there's several ways you can do this, but for stylized characters, one of the I feel like the best ways to do this is to use Blender's curve tools. I've tried modeling directly, and while it worked in some cases, I originally had issues with the curves, and I didn't like this method that much. But after modeling it directly and kind of finding issues with that, I tried this method again, and it ended up working a bit better than I expected the second time. So it may feel a little bit weird at first. Um, but basically, what you do is you create a Bezier curve that represents a hair, and you're going to create a secondary curve that represents the hair's bevel. And what you want to do is reduce that resolution preview fairly low, because what will happen is you'll quickly be using up a ton of geometry because you'll be duplicating strands, stuff like that. It just eats up a lot. I just make it very low here, and then I do just add a subdivision later. But you could also just get away with setting the resolution preview a little bit higher. Start low first, though, and then when you're done, you can adjust that resolution preview later on all the strands. So once you set up your bevel curve, I kind of made it so that there's a bit of an indent at the bottom, just to give it that shape. And then just flatten it out a little bit, just so you have something to work with here. And basically what you just do from this point forward is you move the curve up to the head and just do the best you can to shape it to like the way your character's hair looks. You may have to hide the body sometimes while you do this. Another thing, and just like kind of like anything else in the modeling process, the reference might not be perfect either, and you might find that it looks better when you don't follow reference exactly. So yeah, just do the best you can. And that's where kind of the art portion of the modeling process comes in. Is sometimes it looks better in 2D than it does in 3D, and vice versa. So here, I close it completely at the top here and at the bottom here. Eventually at the bottom here, but I do subdivide it a couple times, so I can close at the top and the bottom, so it kind of gets that tip shape. And then you can use Alt S to scale the curve on each basically subdivision. And then again, just do the best you can here. Just line it up as best you can at this portion of the stage. It's going to be a little bit harder, but what I like to do is once you have it basically where you want it to be, you can make tweaks with this in sculpt mode. Once you're done, you'll just have to convert the hair to a mesh, which we'll be doing that shortly. And then basically just repeat the process, um, duplicate the same bang over, and then just move it all. And you could do a very similar thing with the side bangs as well. For the main portion of the hair, it's also just very similar. Um, Also depends on your character as well, but in this case, her hair is completely symmetrical. Um, I believe I made this for the part of the video, but I just circled basically the three chunks of the hair. It helps to visualize your hair in chunks if you can, and then you can construct the chunks one at a time. One of the things you can do in basically really any discipline of work is just like trying to work your way down. So if you start simple and you work kind of in more details later, it's a bit easier to visualize sometimes. Then basically what I just take here is take the side bang that I mirrored earlier, um, and we'll kind of keep the mirror and fire on it, and then try to and then basically just shape it toward the shape of the main hair. You'll have to Alt S and rotate a little bit the the each vertex on the curve, and it's not going to be perfect because you'll have parts that overlap with the body and all that stuff. But just do the best you can here. You could tweak those parts out once you convert it to a mesh in sculpt mode. So yeah, basically just really just laying down a foundation at this point. And then you'll just repeat that process for basically the three chunks, and then you'll have basically core hair done. this is a part where you would adjust the hair in sculpt mode. So I believe what I do here is I just select all the hair. I might join it together. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, I think I just applied a mirror modifier or whatever. I also just adjust the resolution preview on all the strands now that I have the subdivision on that, just to reduce the geometry a little bit. Um, but essentially what you're going to do is you're going to apply all the modifiers, and then you're going to convert the mesh or the curves into a mesh and join them together. And then you can use Blender sculpt tools to basically just correct any of the shapes that don't really look that great to you. Yeah, I was making some last minute adjustments here, it seems. I think another really important thing here is that you can't convert the mesh back into curves. So I think it's a good idea to take the work you've done with these curves, duplicate them, and put them in a backup scene collection, just in case you ever need to go back to it. And then you could just hide it from the Blender scene. Yeah. I had a little bit of issues trying to convert it to mesh. It might have just been a bug or something, but it it like did not preserve the subdivision surface modifier every time. So I just had to re-add it. Not a big deal. But once you convert all the strands to a mesh, you can join it and then just re-add the subdivision surface modifier. I think it's not a bad idea to kind of like keep it off for now. Or yeah, remove it from all the strands. I also think I mirror it as well, or at least the back portion. Yeah, so remove the subdivision and then convert to a mesh and then re-add the subdivision. And it's just a bit easier that way. And then yeah, I mirror the back hair a bit. I have to basically cut the middle strand in half just so it kind of preserves the mirroring, but it's not too big of a deal. And then from there, you really just use Blender sculpt tools to make adjustments as you see fit. Also, yeah, you don't. When I delete the half here, you can see that I've also deleted some of the geometry on the inside. I'm going to leave the footage here just because it's a bit harder to cut through here, but I don't advise on deleting stuff from the inside of the mesh to try to optimize geometry in this particular case. Because I like try to clean up some of these missing vertices here. And the reason for that is it screws with the weight painting later on. So I don't see, so there's really just don't worry about it. Let the meshes overlap here. Um, and yeah, basically cut the middle one in half, but don't try to remove some of the inner. Yeah, I actually, yeah, this is basically as far as you want to cut into it here before you apply the mirror. And then you can just apply the mirror modifier. Yeah, and then I like to basically take this edge loop and make sure it's clipped um, before I really proceed further. And then the rest of it is just basically like what I said earlier. You can then use sculpt mode to adjust the shape of the hair. Um, and you should be good to go. This will run for a little bit here. So this is really just kind of an additional section here. So if your character has braids, um, now I know this doesn't look super realistic, but this was kind of a hack that I put together just kind of for for my purposes, and I wasn't particularly worried about the realism here. But basically, what you can do is you can create a cube like this, cut it in half on the side, round it out a little bit, and then see like I duplicate the top and bottom parts of it. And then what you can do is then create a curve. And I create that curve by taking some um, loops from the hair itself. And then you can use the curve modifier along with the array modifier to basically construct the braid kind of automatically in a way. And then after that, you just make adjustments in sculpt mode. So I'll let this run through. So this is a part where we talk about the clothing. It's So for the clothing, there's three main methods. Is usually you could just use the body itself to construct clothing at first. You can also use cloth physics, but it really depends on the garment as well. And sometimes it's a little bit overkill. So for the shirt here, I actually just after cleaning up, I'm not exactly sure what I did there. But basically, to make the shirt, you could just use the circle select while in X-ray mode to select the areas where the shirt would be, and then you just duplicate it out. So Shift D, and then you can use something like Alt S to scale it. But I believe I use sculpt mode here because there were parts of the shirt that were kind of clipping inside the model, so I wanted to make sure I manually remove those clips out. But yeah, you basically just want to add a little bit of depth to the shirt. And in this case, because the shirt wasn't really form fitting, I removed the crease from the breast area, and then I used the sculpt mode to actually kind of just loosen it a bit as well. So take a minute to do this, and I just use the smooth tool and the grab tool a bit. Um, yeah, eventually I kind of iron that kink out a little bit. The clipping is kind of messing with it a little bit. I believe I also, yeah, specifically in this case with the shirt, I do remove that part of the breast area just so like because we don't really need that inside shape. You wanted to kind of connect more like this anyway. So yeah, I did make that manual adjustment. Um, Also, really just depends on your character's clothing and all that good stuff. And basically, rest is same as usual. In this case, the pants were just very simple but I also didn't really do a whole lot of detail on the pants. Um, but it's very similar. You just kind of select up from the hips down to where the boots connect, um, and then just duplicate it. Same way did the shirt basically. And because she was wearing baggy pants, I think I added a little bit more geometry near the bottom to create some more of the creases there. And then you can just use sculpt mode like before to this to fix the shape, and really not much to this one. The skirt is the first instance where I use cloth physics, and in this case as well, I actually join the skirt to the shirt when I'm done. Um, but basically, yeah, I'll extrude from the shirt, and then I'll just cut those parts off. Yeah. Um, Actually, yeah, I disconnect it from the shirt, and then yeah, this is where you use cloth physics. So cloth physics is a little bit daunting at first when you are doing Blender, because like getting the right settings to work can be a pain in the butt, but it's still doable. So if you use the settings that I use here as a start, it can at least get you started. And if you want to try to tweak things further from there, go for it. Um, so basically, you have to create a pin group, which is just a vertex group that basically just the very top loop of the skirt you would apply it to. And I use the silk preset um, in the cloth physics tab. You can turn on collisions as well with the body, but it's not really necessary for the skirt here. It's a bit more necessary for maybe other garments of clothing, but for here, it's just like I just kind of let it dangle. And once I feel good with it, you can then convert it to a mesh. The problem here is that it does apply your subdivision surface modifier, but at this point in the modeling process, I think that's fine because then you could just apply the subdivisions and you're more or less done with the main character anyway. I believe what I do is I do duplicate the body and back that up as well before I apply the subdivision to everything. And as you can see here, I'm also just adjusting the skirt in sculpt mode to make it look a little bit better. Yeah, because, okay, in this case, I actually just unsubdivide it. You lose a little bit of the detail, but that is one way you can still preserve the subdivision surface. And then I join it with the shirt in this case as well. Yeah, I had to reapply the mirror because the shirt has that as well. So I just making sure they have the same modifiers when they're joined. It's yeah, but what I was saying earlier is also still something you could consider at this point. Like when you're making the clothing, you don't necessarily need the same subdivisions and stuff like that anymore. It can be helpful though, maybe when you're closer to being done. So like at this portion it's still fine, but like if you want to add more detail at the end, then you could just apply it to the entire like basically dress. So the boots are also very simply done here. They kind of look like winter boots with a little bit of like a fur cap. But basically, you just duplicate the leg and the feet area where we had before, and you just make a couple of extrusions at the top. So you basically extrude the top, and then yeah, then you just highlight basically that loop, and you extrude it out. Um, E then S, and then you can kind of shape it from there. You'll have to thicken the boots a little bit as well. just so they overlap the feet. But when we're done the modeling process, we actually do just remove parts of the model that aren't even visible to save our poly count anyway. So yeah, just make some last minute adjustments in sculpt mode. It's very similar to the other process. So to make the sash, and I will admit that the sash and the bow part are just like horribly done here. But the process is still fairly simple. The sash here is basically just a belt around the dress. So you can just kind of like how you made the shirt, just select the faces that kind of make up where that would be, and then duplicate it out. And then with the sash itself, um, I believe put a shrink wrap modifier. Clean up a little bit of geometry too, but because it did kind of pick up a little bit of the extra geometry from the butt. Um, Actually, no, I do not. Sorry. Anyway, but yeah, basically what I do here is I turn on a shrink wrap modifier and then I shape the sash to go around kind of the reference image here. You can just, yeah, basically eyeball it here. And then because the shrink wrap modifier is on, it will follow the contour of the dress. Um, and then you can just add a little bit of thickness at the end. One thing to note here is that this is asymmetrical, so I just did not apply a mirror modifier here. Yeah, just the thickness a little bit. I don't. I didn't in this case create any thickness like in the inside, just to save a little bit of geometry. Um, so like basically extruding it in the clip with the dress just to get a thickness. Instead, I just kind of have it hover out on the outside, and I just made a couple extra loop cuts to make the ripples. Yeah, for the bow itself, this is something that's just like not very good. But I did kind of just construct it basically using basic shapes. So like I start with this subdivided cube, cut it to make a circle-ish shape, apply a mirror, and then I just kind of like extrude the edges of the bows out. And afterwards, you could just use sculpt mode to shape it a little bit better. I believe I also apply physics to the bottom of the bow just to make the ribbon parts dangle a bit better. And here I also just apply a crease just so like it connects there. And after that, yeah, you just update it with sculpt mode, and then you can move it in object mode to the position where it would be on the character. So yeah, more or less just as you get a little bit more comfortable with Blender and modeling in general, is you can kind of get a feel for how to construct particular things from basic shapes. This is just an example of that. Even though it doesn't look very good, you can still apply that same rule to pretty much anything. Okay, and then this is the part where we do the jacket. Like before, you just duplicate the part of the shirt that you would use or the body. Um, but because the character's jacket is not particularly, it's not particularly long. I just kind of try to select faces that follow a similar contour to the shape of the jacket, and then we'll use edit mode to adjust that before we tweak it with sculpting or physics or anything like that. Yes, I just do the best you can. If there's a little bit of opening there, we can close that in edit mode. So yeah, just go select those pieces. Okay. Yeah, so I actually kind of duplicated it around, changed the view a little bit. Yeah, and then here I make a couple extrusions to get the bottom of the jacket shape. And then here I use the knife tool and I just join this to, yeah, preserve that shape. Yeah, if you dissolve it, the edge here, you could preserve that quad as well. And that's just a general jacket shape. Also use sculpt mode for adjustments. You can use physics if you want here as well to change to make the jacket dangle a little bit. I don't remember if I do or not here. Um, and I just use sculpt mode to kind of increase the sleeves a bit, add a little bit of flare, and then just make sure the jacket's connected. And that's really more or less all there is to it here. Yeah, I do apply physics, so I'll just kind of let this run until we get to the next portion. For the scarf is a bit more complicated just because like I was saying about basic shapes, it's a little bit hard to visualize a scarf with basic shapes. So instead, the basic shape I use here is a line. So I use kind of just I just duplicate a piece of the neck here. That's just basically a simple edge loop, a circular edge loop, and then I just split it. Um, yeah, I just split the middle vertex, and then you can essentially just extrude to draw basically the shape of the scarf, and then you can kind of draw a knot around too. So sometimes you can just do stuff basically by starting with lines. It could be interesting to try to do this with grease pencil or something, but no need to overcomplicate it. Yeah, I tried to make the knot here. So I like threaded it through the knot at first, but you have to extrude the scarf to get a little bit of thickness. And then at this point, you just try to, yeah, you shrink the parts that go through the knot, and you can rotate the edge of the scarf or the edges of the scarf. Really, it just kind of comes down to working through the design and just kind of seeing what you can come up with. We're not striving for perfection here anyway, so it's a general process and it's something that could work for your needs. Yeah. So yeah, basically once I do all this, I do create a edge loop in the middle of the scarf to give it like a little bit more definition, and I just adjust the shape and size. Um, and once you're done as well, you can use sculpt mode to kind of make the scarf a bit more flush with the neck, and you can make the basically the ribbon flowing parts, a bit following the contours of the body a bit better. So this, so one of the interesting, I guess you could say interesting or unique features about my character is that she has little wings on the back of her head. Um, that's kind of a symbolism to like angels in the design that I've used. But also it's just kind of a little, it adds a little bit of visual interest to the character as well. For any sort of object like this, it's similar to like how we made the bow or even the hands. Is you can find like a 2D reference image online and use that as a base, and then just kind of follow the shape of it. And then once you do that, then you would just basically extrude it out on another axis to make it 3D, and then you can just place it where you want it to go on the object, or on the character rather. Yeah, I did add subdivision. I added a couple of edge loops to make the little feather parts here. And another trick too, depending on like how you like to texture your character, you could even just draw this as a 2D image with some alpha, and that's another way you could potentially texture it. But if you want a bit more 3D depth, it is a good idea to model it. So after the clothing is done, this is a part where we just clean up the model a little bit at this point. And all I do at this point is basically back up everything. Um, and then any parts that are obscured by clothing, I just delete. It was brought to my attention that you can actually, rather than just deleting the geometry itself, you could use a modifier that will actually hide the vertices. And then you would just use a vertex group to define which ones you want to remove. I don't remember what modifier is. It might be the mask modifier. But that is an option if you don't really want to back up everything. But I backed up everything anyway, so you can also just delete it. Yeah, I think what I do here, yeah. See, I can see the body here. And then, yep, basically just trying to look for parts that are obscured by the clothing and just remove it. So a lot of the body at this point, except for the hands, can be removed. So that's what I do. You can use some of the options in the select menu, like select mirror, and then just extend as well. It can make things a bit easier. So that way I preserve the head here and the hands from the main body. And then if you need to clean up anything else from the clothing, I think they're just join a bunch of stuff. Um, and then yeah, all the modifiers were applied here as well. Yeah, okay, and I removed the arms. Okay, yeah. So I applied the modifiers at this point just so it's a little bit cleaner to remove stuff, or maybe not necessarily cleaner, but like the model's a bit more consistent now. Um, you could potentially leave the modifiers on, but I actually don't like to apply the modifiers when I export later, and that's mostly just for like the outline when we get to that point. So I did just apply everything here. If you do want to make changes, you do have the backup, so it's not too much of the end of the world. Now this is a portion where we'll actually just apply the basic colors to the model, and the basic shader. It's so basically I'm using kind of a variation of a Toon shader. I add a little bit of soft shading, but for the most part it is a hard shadow. Um, and then the method I'm using for texturing is actually I found this a while ago. And basically instead of trying to UV unwrap every little piece and then texture paint it, you can make colored squares on a very small texture, like a 32 by 32 pixel one. And then you can, when you UV unwrap, you can just move the pieces of the model that you want to be a particular color. The major advantage of this is that it's like really good for prototyping designs. Because then you're not like, if you don't waste a lot of time basically texture painting. If for some reason like you want to change up something like character design, or you have to change the geometry at all, then you have to re UV unwrap it, and then trying to line it up with your existing texture paint is just a pain. So I like using this method, and even if this is not what I use in my final game, it does have some benefits, at least in the early stages. And also, depending on the art style used in your game, you could probably even just use it for the whole thing. A lot of games that use like a minimalist art style use this technique as well. So this is what I'm going to show here because this is what I'm most familiar with. Yeah, so you can even use Blender's image editor here to just create like basically 16 squares of 4x4. And then basically what you would do is just put colors in there and into this map. So I tried to make, at least on my own side, a little bit of a schema here. So like the skin color goes in the top left. There's always a black and white square at the bottom right. And then eventually put other things in there like clothes colors, eye colors, and stuff like that. So the eyes go in the bottom left corner and the clothes colors, and there's also going to be kind of like a darker skin color for like, and then a hair color for like eyebrows and stuff like that too. And then basically, this is why I really like this method. So basically everything that was skin, I just selected it on the model, clicked U unwrap, and just put it in the left quadrant there, and it's just super simple. See, same thing with the hair. I could just use the select linked, the L key, U to unwrap it, put it in square. It's just super fast. Um, Same thing with braids. And that way you don't have to worry about making seams really as much. You still might want to put seams if you have to split colors per se, but it's just very nice. And this is the primary approach I use. And eventually I do update the colors on this UV map, so you'll be able to see you'll see a difference once we get to that point. You'll also notice too, based on the art style I'm using, sometimes I actually do make some seams like in the eyebrows. You can tell to make kind of like an outline. Like the mouth, I did the same thing there. And then you'll see it to make like stripes on the skirt and stuff like that as well. It's something that you can do here, and you have the liberty to do that. So once you lay out the basic colors, now we can update the shader. The shader is also something that you can reuse across your character models. Now, one of the unfortunate thing is if you're making a model for a game and or a game engine, in this case, I use in Godot, um, you cannot take the shader you make in Blender and reuse it in Godot. You have to basically construct a shader in both places manually. It's a bit of a pain, but the reason for that is just because the language used by shaders is just different. Godot's more OpenGL based, and Blender just kind of has its own thing. Um, but you can leverage the node tools in both of them and roughly estimate it between the engines. So I just try to keep them in sync as best as I can. But I like to create the shader to way it would look in the game engine as much as possible, just so it's easier to know how your model will look at that point. So the shader itself is, yeah, what drives the Toon shader is this color ramp node. And then um, I'm not sure I really want to say magic, but there's some tricks I use to add a little bit of finesse to the shader. So there's the one color ramp, but I add a second one. There's this mix shader here, so you can blend the colors with the color ramp, where the black part is the shaded part and the white part is the lit part. Um, and so on and so forth. So we just kind of follow along with this. And essentially, what I'm doing is I'm making a Toon shader so that we have a little bit of control over um, some of the work we have. I believe what I do here is I just do a quick hack where I take the shader. Actually, no, I apply the second color ramp here to add the soft shadow portion. So the hard shadow portion is you use a constant fall off on the first color ramp, and then on the second one you can use any of the other fall offs. And then you can just use a mix RGB node to combine the color ramps with a factor of 50. And then you get a slight little, yeah, you can see it. It's a little bit hard to see in this context here. I think because I still have Blender shadows enabled. But but yeah, it does create a little bit of blending. And I think at the end here, I do just take the existing texture node that defines the colors, and I just run a multiply on it to give it a bit of like to change the shadow a bit. Yeah, here we go. I think, yeah, let's change shadow a little bit. Or maybe I didn't do it here. But there are some other tricks that you can do to change color. Another thing that's also very popular is you just create a second texture called the ambient inclusion texture, and then you multiply that with the base texture. So the ambient inclusion part becomes the part that's shaded, and the base part is the part that's lit. And that can be useful if you want to control how the character looks in lit or shaded ways. Like for example, like rather than using like a black, you might make it reddish. Like actually, yeah, okay, I did do that here. So you have options there as well, but I kept it simple for the sake of this tutorial. If shading is something you'd like me to go into a bit further, just let me know and maybe I'll make a video on it in the future, a more detailed video on it. Now this section is more applicable to like anime style, Toon style characters, and you may not necessarily need to do anything with this on your character. Um, but I wanted to cover it just because like I was trying to make this basically as complete as possible. But to do like anime face shading, there's a number of things you can do, and this method just revolves using a data transfer on a sphere um, to adjust the normals on the head. So you take the sphere, and then you do custom normals, and then nearest face interpolated, and then you also want to just narrow down the vertex group of the data transfer modifier to just only the face. Um, and you can exclude parts of the face too. Like I don't do it here, but you can exclude like pieces of the nose, for example, if you want that to shade more normally. There's really not much else to it here. And then you would want probably a good idea to back up this sphere that we made as well, and then apply the data transfer modifier because sorry, um, having it still applied to or not applied will really slow down the animations when you do that part later. So it's just nice to apply this one once you have it. And then you can just like scale the sphere a little bit and shape it um to make the shade a little bit more the way you like. So that's what I do here. For the nose, we covered that in the next section. Just kind of test the shadow here by moving the light around the z-axis. If that looks good, you can just apply this circle. You will notice that there's a little bit of bumpiness on the shadows. To fix that, we basically just use Blender's normal smooth vectors up a few times. Once we apply this, and then it basically fixes it. So this is another trick I used for making the custom shadows on the character. Now this is kind of the portion of the video where we kind of go into more like the Toon shading type stuff. So this stuff may not really be applicable for your model, but um, I will cover it anyway here. Feel free to skip around. I'll put chapters in the video so that you can skip to the parts that you had issues or not issues with, but needed a little bit more information on. So what I was showing here is that you can make custom shadows by using Vertex paint. So this is a bit of a trick I had. So you notice here the nose is not shaded at all. But what we'll do is we'll use Vertex paint to paint the area of the nose black, and then we could just update our shader. Okay, I make it a group here. We just update the shader so that, yeah, update the shader so that we can use the vertex paint as a variable, and then we can just make sure that anything that is painted black is a shaded region. So you can just multiply the black and the white basically together. So I made the main shader into a group. I just reconnected the base texture and the basically the output. Do some renaming here, and then go into here and to basically apply the custom shadow, you would go right before the shader to RGB, I believe, or right around that area. Okay, so I paint the shadow first so that we know what we're doing. And you can see there's still nothing there. You add, it looks like, yeah. You would add it kind of right between the shader to RGB and the, yeah, there we go, color attribute, and that's where you get your vertex color. Kind of right before the color ramp, actually. Yeah, that's what I do. I create that's it, a mix node with the vertex paint, and then just kind of reconnect it. So now you can see the nose shading. A little goofy, but you just changed it to multiply. Um, and then you can clean it up from there. So yeah, just kind of, you can smooth it out a little bit, and then just kind of paint parts white. Maybe just do a little bit of, there we go, it's a little bit better. So this is an option. This is an additional option that you can use. Of course, it's going to be a little bit blocky, it because of the vertex I have, and you can also just kind of illustrate. You can paint this elsewhere as well, like if you want to make a little bit of like full details. But this is a solution that you could use. Um, and when I recreate the shader in Godot, I do account for this as well. Okay, I was trying to. Yeah, it's not a perfect solution by any means, but it is an option. It also just kind of saves you some effort than trying to make custom normals everywhere and stuff like that. Yeah, paint a little bit more around the neck, stuff like that. So just some examples of how this would be used. Okay, now this is where we would make the outline. So the outline would also be done with a shader in Godot. But as far as Blender goes, we would want to use a solidify modifier just so we can see it here. I created a second material that had back face culling enabled. And then you, with the solidify modifier, you just flip the normals, you put an offset, and then you can use this material offset. Now it looks pretty awful. So you can shrink down the outline. It looks a little bit better, but it still looks pretty awful. So basically what I want to do, also make sure you like reset your normal vectors and everything like that. But the way to fix this basically is to create a outline vertex group, and then you can use weight paint mode. Um, actually, first we remove parts that we just don't want to have an outline at all, like the inside of the eye, anything like that. Maybe the parts where the shirt connects with the jacket. But either way, you just kind of go through this, and then you can use weight paint mode, and you could change the weight of the outline in specific areas. It also kind of just looks more aesthetically pleasing. Um, it also depends a lot too on the size of the outline you use. Like I'm using a fairly thick outline, um, but you might just only use like a very thin one in your games. One thing I also want to mention too is that using an outline effectively doubles the vertex count of your model. So keep that in mind if that's an art choice you want to make in your game. Yeah, and then basically here I just kind of reduce the model, the outline in certain areas, and then there's a smooth weights option that I throw on every so often. I just kind of keep working through it until I feel good with the result. Um, Takes a little bit of time here, but I'll leave it on just so you can follow along. Now, this particular part of the process is used mostly just to give us a little bit more leverage over our shader within Godot, but also in Blender as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to split our vertex colors into different color channels. So notice how we painted black earlier to make the nose shading. What we want to do is want to preserve that, but we also want to have the outline weights in its own color channel. So by leveraging like the R, G, and B channels, we can effectively use our vertex weights or vertex colors as a way to store like three different sets of metadata on our model. And this is stuff that just gets exported for free, so may as well take advantage of it here. And it saves time rather than having to make a texture or anything like that to have this data. Um, I also don't like applying the modifier as mentioned earlier. You can apply the modifier and just have the outline export with the model, but I don't like doing that, and that's mostly just because like partially because of shape keys, but like um, actually it's mostly to do with shape keys. Because you can't apply modifiers with shape keys, so that's why I don't do it. Um, anyway, so what I'm doing here is once you split the vertex colors using the plugin, you can then you can just take the same change that we had before for outline, and since we moved the shading part to the green channel, I just adjusted the shader that way, and then the outlines are now on the red channel, so we don't have to worry about that. But in Blender, it's not really you're not really going to see it there. That's something we'll leverage in Godot though. Now we're just going to put inner outlines, and all I really do here is just select edge loops and just unwrap them specifically and put them in the black on the texture. Really, not much else to this. I think this takes a little time here just because I go through each one, but really it's just that straightforward. Now is the part where we talk about rigging. So rigging is a complex topic, and if you really want to make very specific rigs, that's a whole thing, and it's far beyond my expertise. However, I think just for somebody who just wants to make a 3D model for a game, we don't need to complicate it that much. We'll use Blender's Rigify system, and one of the benefits of doing that is just because it's very well supported, and there's a lot of documentation and stuff out for Rigify. Plus, it gives you a lot of control as far as animation goes. So make sure you have Rigify enabled in your add-ons. It's not by default in Blender. And then you would just create a human meta rig. I deleted the face here because we'll use shape keys for the face. And truth be told, I haven't really messed with advanced rigs on a face. If I did, I could cover that at another time. It's something I might mess with one day if I have the time. But we'll do shape keys for the facial features. So I just remove the face for now. And then here, basically, I'm just aligning the arms and all the fingers. And the way I do the fingers is I use this little trick. Hopefully it'll be a bit easier to see. But basically, once I align these fingers here, I want to align the individual joints of the fingers to the bends we actually made on the model itself. So basically what I do is I duplicate this hand. Yeah, I make a duplicate of the hand. And I hide the old one, basically. And then on this version of the hand, I dissolve basically where, yeah, I just make dissolve it so it's all a single vertex where each joint is on a finger, and just kind of repeat that process. And then once that's done, you would go back to edit mode on the rig itself. You could turn on snapping by point, and then you can just snap the joints to the intersections that we made. And then you could delete the default or the temporary hand. Save some time, and you don't have to worry about being too precise. Yeah, see, that's how I get that part done, basically. And at this point, you can just generate the rig from the meta rig. Um, I didn't really explain it here, but the meta rig is essentially just like a template rig, and then you would generate a rig from it because Rigify generates all the control bones and stuff like that. It's a lot of noise, so it's nice to be able to work with a smaller rig at first to basically define it. So you just test to make sure the rig generates. You're not going to be able to like move the model at all because it's not weight painted yet, but at least you can see it basically works. Okay, so the next part is actually adding a little bit more depth to the rig. So right now it just moves the basic bones, but there's a lot of other areas we can add secondary animation here. For example, the scarf, the hair, the wings, the bow, and even the breasts. Um, so we can leverage basically, we just duplicate a bone and we make a couple of property changes to it. So in this case, you just duplicate a bone, make it basic.super copy, and you can remove the control part of it. So basically what you want Rigify to do is make sure it like provides the bones, but it doesn't like actually create controls. And the reason for this is because it's easier to animate the secondary bones using physics in the game engine. Um, you can add control bones if you want to, if you want to make more manual animations and have control over like all the hair strands and everything like that. But by disabling the control option, it makes the rig a little bit cleaner to work with. But it does guarantee that at least Rigify will generate bones for all the portions that we're doing here. So yeah. So basically we want to create bones for portions of the hair and all that stuff. Rather than using something like a soft body physics model, because and this is very common workflow for game developers actually. They will they will rig pieces like this. And basically this part will take a little bit of a while, but I just go through and basically rig all the portions of the hair and everything else. Make sure you name the bones properly as well. You could put the .l or .r suffix on them, and it lets you mirror them to the other side. It's a very time saving. It's very useful for saving time in Blender. And then in this case, I paired it to hair once to head, and then there are also bone chains. So just kind of go with that. So I'll leave this here just if in case you want to see a little bit more detail. Um, and I'll come back once we talk about the next section. So now you have your advanced rig. We talk about weight painting. So I think what I just demonstrated here is that if you try to take the model and assign automatic weights to a rig, you're going to have some problems. And part of the reason for that is because the automatic weights algorithm Blender has sometimes can't define weights if there's like holes in the model. So rather than fixing holes, we'll use a different method, and I like this better for other reasons anyway. Is what we're going to do is we're basically going to rig pieces of the model one by one. And the way we do this is I basically just duplicated the Rigify rig and separated out only the deform bones. So we have this basically template rig we can use. And what we'll do is we'll separate pieces of the model, and then we'll just go through each bone and we'll assign it automatic. The advantage to this is that if you were to, the advantage to doing it this way, rather than just trying to manual weight paint or trying to apply the weight paint algorithm to the entire model, is that at least you have control over which bones actually apply the weight paint. Um, because otherwise, the weight paint algorithm might add influence to bones that you really don't want to be influencing certain areas. So it gives you more control as well, even though it does take a bit more time. So basically, what I did is you basically just separate portions of this temporary rig, um, and then you just go through each individual bone and say, okay, I want to weight paint that part, weight paint that part, weight paint that part. I believe they changed the shortcut in Blender 4, I think, but like it's like it used to be Control click to select a bone. I think it's like Alt click now. I don't quite remember it. It's one of those. Um, So you would just go through and it's like, okay, I just got the torso done. So I'm going to hide the torso from the model, separate that out. And then once that's done, okay, I'm just doing a quick test. Okay. And once that's done, I just go through rest of it. And you could also split this temporary rig as well, as you'll see when I do the bow. Just kind of just to make things a little bit easier as you work through it. And then once you're done, you just join all the pieces of the model back together, and you would parent it back to your original rig. But don't overwrite the weights. You would just instead just do parent armature, and then you'll be fine. I think right there I had to remove some of the constraints just so I could test the weight paint on that portion. Um, that's what I was doing there. But now I'm just going back and doing automatic weights. It helps a ton to also set your assign automatic to bones to a shortcut. Like I use the quick favorites here to speed up the process, just a lot simpler. Yeah, and that's really what all there is to it to weight painting. Now, you can obviously go and edit weight paints after effect and really make it perfect, but there's really only so much you can do with weight paints, and there's still going to be some jank. I wouldn't worry about the jank too much at this point in time, but if you want to get more advanced, unfortunately, that's not something I'm just like really, akin to. Like this is basically the best I can do, sadly. There are plenty of tutorials out there that cover weight painting in more advanced ways. There's also add-ons that do more advanced weight painting stuff. AutoRig Pro has a weight paint algorithm that's pretty good, and you could certainly explore those options if you want a more in-depth weight paint. But this should get the job done for you, at least initially. So as far as a complete guide goes, I covered how to use Mixamo animations because this is just the simplest way to get animations up and running on your character. And effectively, what Mixamo is it's a library of stock animations, and it knows how to map rigs. Um, so what we do is we make a couple of adjustments to the rig that we have. There's a add-on called XP Kit that we use here because the generated rig that Rigify has multiple root bones, and that does not play nice with either Godot or Mixamo. So XP Kit can fix that for us, which is what I just did now. In addition, we will use it to bind the Mixamo animations back to Blender. So what we're going to do now is we're going to export an FBX file and then upload it to Mixamo so that we can select some animations to apply to our character. Um, Mixamo is an Adobe product, but it is actually free, so don't worry about that. You will have to have an account though. And then you upload your character. Mixamo can actually read Rigify, so you don't have to make too much adjustments as far as that goes. There, but you might find that it fails sometimes. Just be persistent; it will eventually work. And then basically from here, all you do is once it actually loads the animation, I think. Okay. I, Here, let me cut these parts out. I think I had it. I think it took me 5 tries. And basically, once you download all the animations you want from Mixamo, you can use import FPX in Blender, and you can actually import multiple at the same time. And the newer version of XPKit actually lets you bind multiple animations at once as well. So it's pretty neat. Um, I actually exported them without the skin, so that means without the model. So you don't have that extra model to deal with either. So that's pretty nice. And then you got the XP kit here too, where you just say bind to armature. You select your main armature, and you select Rigify controls as your to bind, and then bind to as Rigify to form. You don't want to use the Mixamo option because it respects the schema that we uploaded to it, which was the Rigify to form. So, and once you do that, you just kind of play with the settings here. Start with the settings I have to get a bit more of a consistent result. Um, but you can mess around with this a little bit. And then once you have that, it upload it not it you can kind of just see the animations now there. And then you would just use the XP kit bake animation. And then it takes a minute, but it will take every animation and it will bake it for you. So now this is just the last part here. Is to now that you have a character with animations, a rig, and all that good stuff. This is just how we export it to Godot. Um, I use these specific settings, and this is what I found to work best because you actually really don't have to change much once it's in Godot. I export it as a GLTF, and I don't export the materials or I don't apply modifiers. And then all these other ones I just kind of leave here. The complete guide actually has a little bit more detail in this as well. Um, but this is basically how it works. And then, yep. And then I save it as a preset just to make it easier to go to. It will take some time to export the model. Um, in this case, actually, it was kind of fast, but if you have multiple animations, it will take longer. And then you can see the characters exported. We'll have to manually create the material, so you'll also want to make sure that you have the texture file in Godot as well. Yeah, and in here, basically, I'm just recreating the shader to the best of my ability from Blender. I create a new Toon material, and then inside of their character scene, you just select the model mesh 3D instance, and you just apply material override to it. And then basically, Blender doesn't have the concept of the vertex fragment or light shader like separation. So it's a little bit weird at first, but basically, um, you can use the fragment to load in your texture, and then we can do most of the shading work in the light shader. Yeah, as you see now, at least the texture is loaded. We don't need vertex really for the tune portion. Basically, a nutshell version is that vertex lets you kind of manipulate kind of the vertices on the model using the shader. And we use that for the outline shader, but not for the tune. Fragment is kind of more for the base color, and light changes how basically light is reflected on your model. Um, I think it could also use the fragment shader here to do this tune shader, but when I was originally learning how to do it in Godot, it was the light, so we'll just use that. And then just go through this process for a little bit. And then for the outline, I basically just create a new material and put that in the next pass. And it's just a couple of changes in the vertex shader. Another thing to note here is I create this varying. So the varying allows you to pass information from one of the layers to the other. So like you could pass it from fragment to light, and you could use it as a variable. You'll see here that I also split the vertex colors into the channels so that we can leverage the outline weights at some point, and we can also leverage the custom shading. So this will take a little bit of time, but we'll let this run through. And when we're done here, that's basically all there is to the Godot portion. Um, the last portion is just how you could potentially do shape keys, and that's pretty much the end of the video. Yeah, so just the last thing to do here is just to show briefly how shape keys would be done. Um, Basically, it's fairly simple. Um, Basically, what I did just to make this a little bit easier is I separated the head for now, and there's a shape key tab in your Vertex data. Basically, you create a basis that's basically your still, and you can create one called like eye close, for example. And then once you select that as your shape key, you can edit it in edit mode, make any adjustments you need. Like here, like I think I moved the eye socket back a little bit, or the eyes forward, smooth it out a little bit. Kind of get this, you get the idea here. And it helps to have your mesh completely mirrored so that Blender knows what to do with it. Um, and it just makes some tweaks. Basically, it's basically just modeling different states of the model. The model. Um, like this is just an eye closed state, and then you could test that it works. And then there's a button here that's just mirror shape keys. Um, it's a little bit confusing, I think. Okay, yeah, you move the value to 1, and then you do mirror new shape from mix, and then you mirror it after that, and then you can just kind of break it down. There is a good tutorial on this using shape keys. I think I have it referenced in my online guide, so you can get a little more detail. And if you want to have a wider range of the head, that's basically how you do it. So anyway, thank you for watching, and that's pretty much all there is to this video. Have a great day.